Michael Schiffner, welcome to my pod, The Resolution Room.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Excellent. Now, I really wanted to speak to you because in my work as a coach, people do ask me about business development quite a bit, actually. It's clearly a pain point in professional services. And I've sought you out and found you through my LinkedIn travels, and we've connected and had some good conversations because that's your sweet spot. You're in professional services in business development coaching, and you run a business for some 20 years now called Collective Intelligence. And before that, am I right, Michael, that you came out of the Big Four? You were with KPMG.
Correct. I joined KPMG in 2011 as the National Business Development Coach and was involved in helping establish their BD Academy, and had the privilege to coach 65 partners and directors over that time.
Which would have been quite novel for its time to have business development coaching embedded in a large firm, professional services firm at the time.
It absolutely was. And what was the genesis of that was a couple of the partners recognized that after the GFC, business just wasn't flowing. There was a lot more competition for work, and they recognized that they needed to do something.
Yeah, and I want to go to that because I've sat around partners meetings, okay, and we're talking about a potential promotion from a senior associate or a special counsel into the partnership ranks. And you hear people say, and I've probably even said it, oh, good financial performer, but we're not sure if they get the acumen to build a client base yet or to win new work. And I look back in hindsight and I can't help but feel that in a sense we fail those people by even having those conversations, because at some level we've got these mixed incentives, haven't we? We have these incentives that we set for senior associate special counsel, that you're the billing room, you're the technical experts. And then we sort of say by osmosis, by some miracle, we want you to be, a BD, inverted commas, rainmaker as well. So that's why I was drawn to your work. Have you got any comments on that dilemma and in my previous life? And have you seen that play out?
I think it is definitely what I would call the professional's dilemma, right? Having coached hundreds of professionals now, what became clear for me is that most professionals didn't choose their profession or career to sell. They resist the whole idea or notion of selling because it's incompatible with their personal identity. Yet at some point, they're actually expected to contribute to winning work and revenue. And so there's a few things that sit at the core of that. And one is that they often conflate sales and business development as the same thing. And in my opinion, they're two very distinct things, right? Selling is a push energy, right?
Yeah. Well, Michael, I didn't go to university for 8 years to become a salesperson, you see. That's the issue.
Yeah.
So I'm joking, but what I'm trying to convey is what I like about your work is you address that common confusion, because people are uncomfortable with, I'm a lawyer, I'm a technical expert, that people come to me for advice and guidance, strategic and litigation. And I'm not in that tacky world, but really what your work does is about embed habits and processes, effectively to see business development as intrinsic to your role and part of the long game. Is that a fair summary of where you come from?
Exactly. I mean, you said it a moment ago. Most lawyers are focused on executing work, right? They're fed work from the moment they join the firm, and particularly when they get to the senior levels, like senior associate, special counsel, and then at that point. And usually often only at that point are they starting to think about the partnership and having conversations about joining the partnership. And that's when often they're told, by the way, we need you to demonstrate that you can win work and bring a certain amount of revenue to make a business case to make partnership. And so that often creates an enormous amount of stress and anxiety for many lawyers, senior lawyers, because this whole notion of having to go out and sell is something that for good reason they resist and recoil at. And so helping them to understand that there are two ways to win work. a sales approach or business development. And to me, those are two very distinct, different approaches that achieve the same result. And business development is about creating a high trust, high trust relationships with referrers, with all previous clients, and this whole notion of focusing on helping clients is something that's going to create reciprocity, and the work will come to them.
And the wonderful thing about that work is for a professional, you can help them say, hey, you can embed this into your day-to-day and your processes, and you can really add value and preempt and be a thought leader and preempt problems and be really generous with your network and your referrers to win work. And do you also hit against this myth, if I can call it that, which is I'm a technical expert, and that in itself can be a hard process, and it's never complete. It's always a work in progress. But Michael, not like Damien over here, I'm a bit of an introvert. I'm not the proverbial, that whole historical myth of the rainmaker, larger than life, charismatic person. And I've often said to people that is entirely a myth, of course, and that business development for professional services is about embedding good habits, but being authentic to who you are. You don't that whole notion of being larger than life, extroverted, working the stage is exactly that, a myth.
I mean, there's no question. Most firms have a handful of partners that generate most of the firm's fees and attract work and are known as rainmakers. And historically, many lawyers think that they have to be this gregarious, life of the party extrovert, and they know that that's not them. And the truth is, yes, there are successful rainmakers that fall into that kind of description, but I have come across and worked with many lawyers that are incredibly effective and are what we would describe true introverts. So much of the work that I do when I'm coaching people is helping them, first of all, challenge some of their beliefs and self-limiting beliefs. And one of those is around what makes a good rainmaker. And there was some really interesting research that was done into professional services and was published in the Harvard Business Review just a couple of years ago in 2024. And the authors went on to write a book titled The Activator Advantage. And in that, they went out and surveyed just shy of 2,000 people that are in professional services, so partners across different professional service firms. And what they were looking for was, are there some different styles in which partners go about rainmaking? And what they found was there definitely was. And there were 5 different types of rainmakers. 4 of those 5 actually were negatively correlated with revenue growth. And the one that was called the activator. I think a lot of times when I'm coaching people, I explain that there are more than one way to win work. And what works for you, Damien, might not work for me, and vice versa. And so a lot of the coaching is around, how do we play to your strengths, and how do we help you overcome some of the common self-limiting beliefs. And many lawyers that I work with have a very, what I would call, strong inner critic, right? So helping them tame that inner critic, helping them tame their perfectionist tendencies, which is common in law. Those are the things that coaching can really support senior lawyers to start to get out of their comfort zone and actually go out and engage in business development and start to realize that, I can do this. This is something that I can do, and I can play to my strengths and succeed. And I don't have to do it the way Michael or Damien does it, for example.
Yeah, and I want to talk about your work on the mindset and those limiting beliefs. But before I do, I just want to drill down on the point you made for the audience, that the Activator Advantage, it comes out of the Harvard Business Review, and it is research-based. I've read the article that you sent me, and the book's on my reading list, Michael, and I know you work a lot with your clients in that space as well. So the notion of the activator archetype, if I could call it that, or the kind, what are some of the key attributes that make this activator and make it work as a type?
Yeah. Essentially it boils down to 3 things. Commit, connect, and create. Those rainmakers that committed to business development, meaning they actually protect time for business development and they make it part of their daily routine. when I'm coaching people, that's what I'm focused on. I say, my role is over the next 6 months to help you build really strong habits around business development. So for many lawyers, business development has not been part of their daily routine yet. And so it's how do they create those routines, and so they're investing time. The other thing is that they commit to actually writing out or documenting a business development strategy that's personalized to them and setting some specific goals for networking and client engagement. And then actually what I've seen work really well is that they actually plan what they're going to do. So they actually put time aside to plan their BD activities for the week or fortnight ahead. Those are the things that I've seen work really well. So that's the commit portion of the activators. The second is connecting. So building broad, robust networks, engaging with a wide range of contacts at all levels within a client organization, for example. Connecting with colleagues, internally across their firm, fostering collaboration and really expanding the reach of their network. And then just having those regular check-ins, both with active and even inactive clients, and just nurturing those relationships is what happens. I find time and time again, Damien, clients, they've lost touch with people. So I get them to just make a list. Just make a list of the people that you should be in touch with. You probably maybe haven't seen them for over 12 months. Reach out, catch up for a coffee, breakfast, lunch, or just a phone call. And what I find time and time again is they always come back and they say the same thing. It's like, Michael, a week, 2 weeks after I had that coffee, they gave me a call, sent me a matter. So it's staying front of mind. Really, that's the big piece, is staying front of mind. The third core activator behavior is about creating value for their network, sharing ideas, insights, market developments with their network. Really helps position them as someone who's a valuable resource, right? And what I've experienced is if you're the first to give, the law of reciprocity generally kicks in, and clients will want to work with you. So that's sort of the third area, and sort of linked to that is LinkedIn. A lot of them I find are not active on social media. They don't use LinkedIn. They're not posting. And so they're not actually staying front of mind with their network. That's the three things that activators do. And it works.
It certainly does. And I've been reminded of that in recent times. My business now, after I left the partnership, is only less than 2 years old, but I've really put in place habits around newsletters and my LinkedIn. And I just think of it as, this is what I do twice a week. And of course, I've got this podcast. So I'm just trying to make habits and not be crazy ambitious, but be consistent, and just make it part of my day-to-day regime. And that whole notion of giving and being generous in your network, it's really interesting. Some of the newsletters I've got offering free lunch and learns. If I send 600 emails out and I get 2 responses say come in, that's an amazing win, and that I wouldn't have got if I hadn't, systematized that newsletter. But so that's really important for our audience, and I will urge you, if you do, to read that book, because I think it's really fascinating, and it sort of, you can see from your summary of it that you don't necessarily need to be this larger than life gregarious person as long as you're doing those 3 things within your own authenticity and your own style. So I want to go to mindset, because you do a lot of that work. And again, I've been confronted by a couple of, in my own business, again, a few dark nights of the soul where I go, oh, what am I really doing? Does my voice really matter? What am I putting myself out there like this? Why am I all over LinkedIn like a cheap suit? And Michael, my suits aren't cheap, by the way. But there's been that sort of, we all have that in our head. And I know you work at the mindset level. What are some of the core, if you like, limiting beliefs, particularly in a lawyer's background, that you work with, that people have to look at head on and try to address in terms of business development?
Fear of rejection, right? None of us like to be rejected. I see a lot of lawyers that are worried about being rejected, so they don't put themselves in that position to be rejected, right? So they don't reach out. They draft the email, but they never send it. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is helping them to actually test. Let's imagine that you did get rejected. How bad would that be? What would that actually feel like? And I remember speaking to one partner that I was coaching, and I said to her, what's your biggest fear? And she said, my biggest fear would be I'm rejected. And then she laughed. And I said, why are you laughing? She said, well, now that the words come out of my mouth and I hear myself saying it sounds so silly. I'm a partner of a law firm. I think a lot of the times part of the value is just talking this through with a coach.
The fear of failure is huge. I obviously need to look at that squarely in some of my work, but it sort of links a bit with perfectionism too, because the reason I address it in emerging leaders phase in my program is because the sooner you start to think about this in your professional journey, I think the better off you are.
I grew up with a father who was a perfectionist, so I often refer to myself as a recovering perfectionist, And so I can really empathize with a lot of professionals. One of the things about particularly the law is it tends to attract people who have perfectionist tendencies. And that can be a strength, but it can also be a weakness. And in terms of business development, starting to recognize that you don't have to be perfect from the start, and that progress is better than perfection. A lot of the work that I do is around helping professionals start to understand how do they overcome these perfectionist tendencies and just let go of that old persona and that attachment to perfectionism, because it doesn't serve them.
Yeah, there's a sense in BD, and I know it's hard to get to this place sometimes internally, but that failure is feedback effectively, and that you need an experimenter's mindset, which is actually at times why I like the creativity of business development. But it's very confronting as well in terms of overcoming those internal narratives. And as you say, most people that are drawn to law have fairly compliant, academic background, did well at school, and they often, as a consequence of that or other factors in their life, have a pretty overblown inner critic. So I can see why the work you do in the mindset space really does matter. Another feature of your work, Michael, and that comes out in collective intelligence, which I like in terms of your coaching model, is you do one-on-one work, but you also do group work in which you kind of bring people together and they can learn from each other. And I guess that normalizes the fact that we're not alone in some of these common dilemmas. Talk us through that aspect of your work in terms of collective intelligence.
It's actually one of the most exciting parts of the coaching work that I do. And we call them wisdom circles because it's an opportunity that often many of the people who participate wouldn't otherwise get to sit around in a room with their peers and actually have a conversation about business development that is authentic, it's real, and we create a safe environment for them to share their experiences, share their concerns, share their fears. And what typically happens is a couple things. One is they realize that, oh, I'm not the only one who suffers from imposter thoughts, right? And this whole phenomenon of imposter syndrome is so perverse. So many professionals suffer from it, and yet they think that they're the only one. And so, as you said, it normalizes that, okay, I'm not alone. And that in itself is hugely advantageous for people who are just crippled by the thoughts that they have. That's a big part of the wisdom circles. But the other thing about the wisdom circles is they get to hear from their peers, because the way we structure it is we get everyone to contribute. Everyone is part of the conversation and are contributing wisdom to the circle. And so the idea is we're there to learn from one another. And what we do is we get different opinions and views and perspectives that help us start to look at business development from a different perspective and just start to see that there is so many different ways to going about building client relationships, winning work, and doing it, as you said, in a very authentic and real way.
One of the things I say in my Emerging Leaders program, no one really cares about you. Now, what I'm trying to convey to people is that they overblow the voice of others saying this isn't good enough, or this doesn't matter, or this doesn't count, or this doesn't add value, because everyone else is having the same voice and everyone else is busy with their own life. So just go ahead and do it anyway. So that's one of the things I say to people. That sounds pretty harsh, but it's been quite liberating for me personally. That notion is actually quite liberating, because I know that I've just got to get out there and do it anyway.
I often say we're actually all narcissists, because most of us are so focused on ourselves, and we spend a lot of our days thinking about what other people think of us. And the reality is everyone else is thinking the same thing. In other words, they're worried about what other people are thinking about. They're not actually thinking about you. So I think it is hugely liberating. And one of the things that we have integrated into the coaching work that we do comes from some work at Harvard by Professor Robert Keegan and his colleagues. They spent 20 years researching what holds people back from change. And they actually wrote a book called Immunity to Change. So some of your listeners may want to go and look into the work that Robert Keegan does. What he found was that people who have genuinely, like, for example, in business development, genuinely want to go and win work and engage in business development activities, maintaining relationships, expanding relationships, have what he calls competing commitments. And those competing commitments hold them back. And often, for example, a competing commitment is I'm committed to not embarrassing myself. I've met many lawyers who they don't want to put themselves in a position to embarrass themselves. So that what happens is many lawyers don't put themselves in a position to be rejected based on an underlying assumption, right? And the assumption is that if I go out and have coffee with you to have a business development conversation, I might embarrass myself. Right. So I'm not going to put myself in that position. So what I've seen is that since we started integrating the work of the immunity to change work into our coaching methodology, we're helping them reveal their own self-limiting thoughts and self-limiting beliefs. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And it's such an important conversation, because if you go again to that article you shared, and I'll share it in the show notes on the Activator Advantage, it's more critical than ever and there's more opportunities than ever, because clients are less loyal and do shop around. There might be procurement or other issues. So in today's environment, your work, Michael, assumes even more importance, does it not? And gives actually the fact that clients are less loyal, the upside of that is, of course, the activators can try over time to win them. So that's also provides a level of opportunity.
Certainly. So there's two sides to that coin, right? It means your clients are going to be less loyal, but it also means your competitors' clients are going to be less loyal. So if you're embracing the activator profile, right, and reaching out, building networks and relationships and creating value, there's a lot of opportunity.
And I also talk to people about playing the long game, in the sense that, and this gets you away from the sales focus, that it's never linear. I remember I was in the UK and I got a call for work that I wasn't been chasing, but I'd managed these relationships or kept up, just out of the blue, saying we'd like to give you this line of work, and it wasn't front and center of because what you do historically and the relationship you build and the rapport that you do really does matter. And so don't see it too transactionally, see it more relationally. I suppose what I'm trying to say is, if you play the game relationally, you can get some unexpected wins that you don't necessarily even plan for, which is a good problem to have.
Yeah, indeed.
I hope that was a really useful conversation. I'm going to share some of those resources. So where can people find you, Michael, in terms of your work, and what's next for you and your business, Collective Intelligence?
Thanks very much, Damien. First of all, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you for the invitation to join you and your listeners. And I hope your listeners got some real value. If anyone listening is interested in learning more about the work we do, I do get invited to speak at conferences, partners offsites, various things like that. So more than happy to do that. Also, myself and my team, we're now 10 strong, and all of us have a background in professional services. Myself and the other 9 coaches working with me, we can really relate. We've been in their shoes. We understand what works and what the typical challenges are. So be delighted to entertain a conversation with any of your listeners. Also, would love to connect with them on LinkedIn if they're so inclined. But they can find us at collectiveintelligence.net.au. So that's collectiveintelligence.net.au. And thank you again. Really been a pleasure.
My pleasure, Michael. And I know, for example, in the facilitation and coaching space, that you've done a work since I've left with DWF. So you've got a great reputation in the market. The fact that you jumped out some 20 years ago, and that's a great story in itself. And it really does show that time in the market and a commitment matters. So well done for your business and where you found it. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you. And I know we've got something lined up in our diaries to catch up in Brisbane. So all the very best, Michael. And thanks again.
Thanks, Damien. Take care.